Hey everyone, Nathan Lustig here. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Crossing Borders, where I interview entrepreneurs doing startups across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on companies that have some relationship to Latin America. My guest today is Thomas Allier, co-founder of Viajala, a flight meta search that millions of people use each month across Latin America to find the best flight deals. Think of it like the kayak of Latin America. Originally from Paris, France, Thomas found himself on a 6-hour that turned into a 12-hour bus ride through the Colombian countryside. When he got to his destination, he realized that he could have flown that same distance in 30 minutes. The problem? He couldn't find that flight route in the local travel agency website. After going back to France and working at a French meta search portal that was later acquired, Thomas applied for and won Startup Chile in 2013 and participated in the program, launching his business and then relocating to Medellin, Colombia, where he raised money and expanded across Latin America. We talk about what it's like being a European entrepreneur in Latin America, scaling a business with a distributed team, and how he thinks about Latin American market. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Thomas Allier. Hello, Thomas, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nathan. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
No, of course. Thanks for taking the time. So where are you in the world today?
I'm in Medellin, Colombia.
Very nice. It's one of my favorite cities in Latin America. So what are you doing in Medellin?
So I'm currently building a travel meta search company that focuses on the Latin market. This is a company we started 4 years ago, so it's been a long journey. Actually, we started in Chile.
Very nice. And where are you from originally?
I'm from France. I'm from Paris. I used to be a product development manager for an e-commerce company called Price Minister there that was acquired by Rakuten a few years ago. And that's basically what motivated me to do my own company, to start my own venture 4 years ago.
And did you start with the idea in France and then go to Chile, or did you go to Chile first?
Yeah, so I was kind of using, the same kind of product to search for flights in French. So what we call the travel meta search products. And basically, the first time I traveled to Colombia, to South America, basically. So it was in Colombia. It was about 5 years ago. Okay. I spent a few days at the city where my in-laws live. That's called Pereira. It's a mid-sized city in the coffee region. Okay. And our first trip was to Medellin, actually. So Pereira to Medellin, it's about 150 miles. And we took the bus because we didn't know you have another way to do it. So normally by bus, it takes you like 6 hours to do 150 miles because Colombia, it's a country full of mountains, like many countries in South America because of the Andes mountains. Okay. We had like some issues during the trip. So basically, the engine of our bus broke. We were left behind in Ira, which is a small town, and we had to wait for another bus, and it took us like 12 hours to make it to Medellin. So what we didn't know then is that actually you have two airlines company that fly from Pereira to Medellin, and it just takes you 30 minutes to get there by flight. Okay. But why we didn't know that? It's because these airlines are not searchable through, let's say, online travel agency or search engine, just because they are not distributing their content. And that's the case with many airlines in Colombia, many airlines in Latin America. So mostly the regional airlines, sometimes the low-cost airlines, they don't distribute their inventory either. So you have, I think that you're in Chile. You have JetSmart, for example, in Chile that just started to operate in this market. And so basically, based on that, we decided that we should fix travel search for Colombia and for Latin America in general. And we should do that by aggregating all the content from all the different airlines that you have on the market. And we started with Colombia, where most value could be added.
Why aren't those airlines sharing their data previously? Is it a business decision like some of the airlines in the US that don't share, or is it just a technology problem?
Yeah, so it's a bit of both. I think you mentioned the case of the US. So the US market is very concentrated. You have like a handful of suppliers, like 5 or 6 airlines that share the whole market. So they have a lot of leverage in front of distribution channels. I think if you look at Latin America, so it's either a matter of size. So I was mentioning the regional airlines. They don't have the kind of size, to work with the global distribution system, which are the regular distribution platform like Amadeus or Sabre. So that's basically the technology platform that the airlines to sell their inventory, so their tickets through online travel, so through travel agencies or online travel agencies. So they don't have the size to work with GDS. So that's why you cannot, search them in Despegar or in travel agencies. Okay. And then you have the low cost airlines. So I was talking about JetSmart. You have Viva Aerobus in Mexico. You have Azul in Brazil. You have a new one called Flybondi that is going to start to operate in Argentina. So it's a model that is becoming very popular in Latin America. And because it's a low-cost model, they don't want to, they want to cut the cost everywhere it's possible. And that includes distribution channels. So that's why these airlines, usually they don't want to work with the distribution platforms and they don't want to work with travel agencies. But in our case, we came with a different model, which is the meta search model, where you don't book through our website. Okay. You search for our website and then we redirect you to one of our partners. So it can be the airline websites or the travel agencies websites. Okay. And this way, the low cost, let's say, or the regional airlines or whatever have the control over the user experience. They can sell their ancillary products. So let's say, check luggage, for example, you have to pay for it. They can sell that through their page and make money. And so that makes sense for them to work with us, but that does not make sense for them to work with, online travel agencies that control the sale experience.
Got it. That makes sense. So you had this terrible bus ride that took 12 hours instead of a 30-minute flight, and you got to Medellin. What was the next step? How did you decide to actually tackle this problem?
Yeah, so it took some time because after that, I went back to France to work for the company I used to work for. But the idea was there already, and I was just, looking into an opportunity to say, okay, I'm gonna quit my job, find partners and start my business. Okay. So I started to discuss the idea with a few potential co-founders, I would say, including, developers that became my CTO and that used to work with me at Price Minister. Okay. And then we applied for the Startup Chile program. Okay. With this idea of doing a travel meta search company that would focus on the LATAM market. And luckily we got in. So I moved to Chile. I quit my job. I went there with my wife that is also a partner in work and my co-founder, my CTO. We started to work with another French guy located in Bogota. Okay. That would do the business development. And so from the very start, we had a team of 4 people with very, versatile profile, I would say. So my focus is on product development. My CTO focus is on technology. My wife do business administration, and Josian focus a lot of on sales and business development. Okay. So basically, we had the human capital, I'd say, to start the business. And with the help of Startup Chile, we were able to focus very fast on releasing a first version of our product and start, gaining traction in terms of users using our websites and travel brands listing their contents into our search engine.
And what year was this when you first got to Startup Chile?
It was 2013, so 4 years ago.
Interesting. As a foreigner from Europe going to Latin America, what stood out to you about Startup Chile that made you decide that you wanted to actually do it?
So first, I think it was very innovative because back then, I don't think we had such a program in France, for example. I think this kind of program actually did not exist anywhere else. So they were the Startup Chile really pioneered this kind of, governmental program that gives you free money. Okay. And then, a few countries kind of starting doing the same, but back then they were the first to do that. So the first point is, Chile being very aggressive in terms of attracting foreign entrepreneurs. Then I would say that the second surprise to me was how international the program were. So you would expect more South American, but actually the biggest, the most representative nationality was the US. Okay, then Chile, I think. Then you had people even from Indonesia, Africa. So incredibly international, and the opportunity to connect with many different people and not that much constraint because you can build your business out of Chile. And if it does not make sense to you to stay in Chile, you can bring your business anywhere you want.
Yeah, Startup Chile was really innovative. And if anyone's listening wants to hear more about that story, you can listen to episode 3 with Nicolas Shea, who was one of the co-founders of Startup Chile, or episode 14 with Sebastian Vidal, who was one of the executive directors and now runs Parallel 18, which is a copy or an improvement on Startup Chile in Puerto Rico. Did you hire anybody locally in Chile during Startup Chile, or was it just working with your core team?
No, actually, I was just working with our core team. It takes a lot of time and traction to be able, just to pay a core team of 4 people, I would say. So it was not until basically 2015. So we started with this core team. We added a 5th member years later, our VP marketing, who's also French and used to work at companies like Expedia. Okay. And he was working remotely at first. And unfortunately, we could not stay in Chile, so we had to move to Colombia in 2014. We went through a couple of incubator programs, one of which is WIDA, so the incubator of Telefonica, and the other ones being Social Atom Ventures of Andres Barreto. Okay, and we also received another grant from Ruta N, which is the equivalent of Corfo for Medellin. So basically, the public entity that finance entrepreneurship in Medellin.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of getting into an accelerator like Wyra and then working with Social Atom, which is now First Rock in Medellin?
Yes. So basically, I think that the main difference with Startup Chile is that those are private programs. So usually you need to give up equity of your company instead of money and instead of services usually. So instead of the kind of advice they can provide to you, also it requires a bit more traction to get there. So you need already to show some users, some paying customers and revenue and very kind of exponential growth that these kind of incubators are looking for. So that's what it takes to get in. And I think that we wanted leverage to negotiate. So basically, we started to put Social Atom and WIDA into some kind of competition, but in the end, we ended up liking both and taking part into both programs. And I think that next, it's up to each entrepreneur to see what kind of value can be brought by these incubators. So for us, I think that WIDA was mostly helpful for PR because WIDA it's a subsidiary of Telefonica. So Telefonica has presence in most of our markets. Now we have presence in 6 markets of LATAM, and each of these markets, Telefonica has presence, and they have a PR team. So they've been very helpful to help us, to help Diagela, which is a B2C brand, to get consumer traction by making an impact and having presence on big media. Okay, so WIDA was very helpful for that. They can also introduce you to some investors. I think that it's a bit stupid, but it gives you a bit more credibility when you need to raise a larger round. And in terms of Social Atom Ventures, I think that their value proposition is that they want to help. I think that they switch a bit. So now they mostly focus on startups that have market in the US. And because it's so expensive to hire developers in the US, their value proposition is that you can actually build a nearshore engineering team in Colombia. So it could be in Medellin, which will cost you much less than it would in the US. But still, you will be able to grow a business and take the best of the very big opportunity of the US market, while having the low cost of having your software engineer operation in Medellin.
That model of sort of nearshoring and having a second team in Latin America, but still attacking the US market is something that we also do at Magma. And if you want to hear more about that investment thesis, I have a conversation with Andres from First Rock and Social Atom in episode 19. You can take a listen to that. But so you got into Medellin. When you just arrived there, were you operating in Colombia and additional countries, or just in one?
No, so we had business operation in Chile and Colombia back then, okay? But most of our traction was in Colombia, and I think that Colombia was a much better market than Chile for us because of the kind of competition that you have in Colombia. So I was giving you this example about Pereira Medellin, where you have a couple of airlines flying this from this origin to this destination. But basically you have 8 domestic airlines in Colombia at this point. 2 are low cost. So that's an insane kind of competition, and that translates into very cheap prices. And that also makes a lot of sense for the consumer to compare. And if you compare that to Chile, the Chile of 3 years ago, so it was basically LATAM owning the entire market and Sky Airline trying to survive a little bit. Okay. So if you look at 3 years ago, Colombia was a much better market for us, and that's why we decided to relocate.
No, that makes sense. And it really is amazing how much competition there is in the Colombian air travel market. You can fly between basically any city, any of the big cities for $100 or less pretty much at any time, even like on a one-day notice.
Actually, you have, for example, Via Colombia, which is, an ultra low-cost airline. So they have this very aggressive model like Ryanair in Europe or Spirit in the US. They sell you free tickets. You just have to pay the fees. So that's, let's say, $6, and you just pay the fee and you can travel to whatever destination you like.
Wow, that's amazing. I should check that out next time I'm in Colombia. So what was it like doing business as a European in Latin America? What did it feel like working with Latin American companies? How did they treat you?
I think that you have to get used to the fact that things go pretty slow. And especially if you think about the kind of customers that we have. So basically, if you look at Viajala, the customer is not the consumer, so the traveler. The traveler don't pay us nothing, and we are free for travelers. Instead, the travel brands pay us for the traffic that we send them. So the travel brands, they are big airlines, big online travel agency, so big companies, big corporation with a very different culture. So sometimes you have to get used to the fact that things take time and you have to be very patient. Until now, I think the deals that took most time for us to close was with Cocha. So I think that you're familiar with Cocha because they are the largest travel agencies in Chile.
Yep.
Okay. And they are building an online travel agency, so you can, book tickets through Cocha.com. And we wanted to have them into our meta search because they are a very good brand, very popular in Chile. Okay. But because they were not ready in terms of technology and doing technical migration, and because they didn't know about the kind of business model we were offering to them, it took us like 3 years to start working with them. So you have to be very patient.
Yeah, sometimes you can get a really long sales cycle when you're doing B2B sales in LATAM.
Exactly. I can give you a second example because actually it was very difficult for me to pitch our business while in Startup Chile because most of the audience were Chilean. And if you ask a Chilean how do they travel, basically they will tell you that they go to the latam.com website and they book from there. It took us, I think, 4 years to make a global deal with latam.com, with Latam. So basically we had a deal since the beginning with Latam Colombia, but let's say Latam Chile or Peru, where they have a kind of a monopoly, they didn't want to work with us. So it took us a very long time to be able to work with them everywhere.
Yeah. How did it work working with other sort of Latin America wide companies? Were you able to get Latin America level deals from the beginning, or did you have to do it similar to LATAM where you just got Colombia first and then it took a while to get the rest of the countries together?
I think anyways, in the beginning, we just had like operation in Colombia and Chile, as I told you, and the kind of travel brands that you find in each country are different. So in Chile, the travel agencies are Cocha and Travel Security. And in Colombia, you have Aviatur and Tiquetes Baratos to give you some examples. So at the beginning, it was mostly local deals, but we started to add some global brands as well. And we were able to leverage on this a little bit to open new markets. But I would say that from 2013 until the time we closed our Series C, which was April 2015, so a couple of years, we just had traction in Colombia mostly.
So what kind of traction did you have in Colombia when you closed your seed round?
Yeah, so we had 300,000 users a month. Okay, basically. We had about 20 travel brands listing their offers into our search engine. And we had a big differentiators because we had direct integration with Viva Colombia, which you only could search through Viajala back then. We had direct integration with EasyFly and ADA, which are the two airlines that I mentioned that fly from Medellin to Pereira and that you could not search anywhere else. So we basically had a lot of content and we were able to add a lot of value to the consumers. And by doing that, so we had this kind, of traction in terms of users, and we were making about $20,000 in monthly revenue, which is enough, to sustain an operation of basically 5 people. You can, pay you basically low salaries, but it's enough to live in a city like Medellin, Colombia.
So talking about living in a city like Medellin, what does it cost to live decently in Medellin?
I'd say you can live very decently with $1,500 a month, I would say. In El Poblado, like in a rich neighborhood, you can live with $1,500 a month. It's much cheaper than Santiago, for example. It's much cheaper than Bogota. Bogota is the same kind of price as Santiago, but Medellin, which is a second site city, is much cheaper than those.
Yeah, Medellin is really a hidden gem for how cheap it is and how good the quality of life is.
Exactly. The people usually like the weather because it's, people call this city the city of eternal spring. I like the fact that I can walk from my home to my workplace. I like the fact that it's very green. It's a city kind of in the middle of a tropical forest, I would say. A number that I like a lot is that you have more bird species in Medellin than in the entire Netherlands. I think it's funny.
Wow. And for most people that haven't been to Colombia before, they've probably only seen Narcos on Netflix, or they've seen, the Pablo Escobar story. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like living day to day in Medellin today?
Yeah. So first thing, I think that people here really hate Narcos. They really hate this kind of TV shows because, they are kind of trying to get off this image that they used to have. But I think the good thing about Narco is that many people from abroad are traveling here and get to know the city, and maybe they come because of Narco, but they find something else. So basically, I think that Medellin has become much safer than it used to be. So now if you walk around the Poblado at whatever time of the day or the night, it's safe enough, I would say. You won't find many problems. And I think that Medellin is, starting to try to switch into something better. So let's say the paisas, so the people that lives here in Medellin and in the Antioquia region, they have a very entrepreneurial mindset. Most of them, they don't do startup, but they like to be independent and run their own business. And I think that because of that, so the big company from Medellin, they started, to build this program, Ruta N, to be able to support new entrepreneurs and innovation in the city. And the city was elected most innovative cities. I think it was in 2014 by the Washington Post. I think it's a bit of a PR stunt, but it gives you an idea of the fact that the city wants to move on from this image of narco and stuff into something else.
Yeah, I think some of the stats that I've seen is that the murder rate in Medellin is down 97% since its peak in the 80s. It's a completely different city now. And I think some of the reason why Medellin was awarded that innovation award is for the work connecting up sort of the poorer neighborhoods and integrating them to the rest of the city with the metro and then the cable cars. I think that that's just been really interesting to see Medellin, where they took sort of a bottom-up focus on developing the city rather than a top-down.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's true. The public policy has been to give the best to the poorest, basically. So, let's say they have built this very beautiful building called the Biblioteca España, so the Spanish library, in the middle of a comuna, so a very humble neighborhood. And it's a beautiful artistic building of architecture, that you can visit. And it's connected to the metro by a metro cable. So, the kind of transportation that, we, European or even in the US, you would take to go skiing, for example. So I think that's very fun. And that was one of the big innovations here in Medellin, that they were one of the first city, or mainly the first city, to use this kind of transportation as public transportation. And it's something very useful here because of if you look at the topography of the city, it's pretty much a valley. So you have a part at the bottom of the valley where you have the river and the metro. But then if you want to go uphill, it can be a bit tough doing that walking. But with the cable, you can go there pretty easily.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see. And La Paz in Bolivia also has the same system. And it takes about 45 minutes or an hour by car to go from the airport down to the main sort of center of the city. And it takes 15 minutes or even less in the cable car. And Medellin is very similar.
Exactly. Also, they have electric stairs at some part of the city, which is called San Javier. So it's a neighborhood in the west of the city after the stadium that used to be very rough. So that was the roughest neighborhood of Medellin, basically. And most, of the movies that show the bad part of Medellin was filmed in these neighborhoods, let's say 20 years ago, for instance. And now they put electric stairs, so you can go up there. And around the electric stairs, they've painted the walls, and they are doing like some graffiti works and stuff. And you have like people coming from artists coming from many different parts of the world, even France, to do street art and graffitis in these walls. And it's one of the most popular place for tourists to go.
So one of the things I noticed in Medellin is, compared to other places in Latin America, is there's a lot of foreigners. There's a lot of people from the US. There's a lot of people from Europe that are working there. Many times they could be working remotely for a tech company or teaching English or other businesses. What's it like recruiting and getting talent in Medellin for your company?
Yeah, so I think you have like, when you're a tech company, so you're basically looking for software engineers. So when you're a company built by foreigners, like it's our case, you basically have two options for recruiting this kind of talent. One option is that you can pick some of them from IT service companies. So the one that do nearshoring, because they don't do software for Colombia. Most of them do software for companies in the US. So here in Medellin, we have a company called Huge. We have a company called Globant that is from Argentina, but have presence all over Latin America. We have a company called UXI Global, and all these companies, they do nearshoring. So they hire engineers, and they put them to work on projects from outside. And, I think it's good for the ecosystem because it has the effect of training engineers. And so we can find a high skilled engineer here in Medellin. The issue with that is that, they are not like product focused people or even people that have a sense of belonging to a company, simply because they work for a company that puts them to work for one company this month and then another company the next month. So these guys, they're used to work remotely, and sometimes they're a bit difficult to retain when you're doing a startup or when you will have your software guys to work on the same product for a few years. So that's basically option one. And then option two is what you mentioned. So the guys that come from abroad because they like the city, because they like the quality of life, because it's cheap. And some of them, they are working remotely for a company in their home countries, but some of them are looking for opportunities. So we found that Viajala is a good destination for talents from France or other countries as well that are looking for some kind of tropical experience, but still want to gain experience in their field and make something relevant for their career.
Yeah, we've seen very similar in Chile and then also in Mexico City, with lots of people coming from the US and Europe to get that sort of life experience.
Exactly. And I think so here in Medellin, we have a big French community, but you have a big French community almost in any part of the world. I agree with you that many citizens from the US come here, especially in El Poblado or Laureles, because they like the quality of life, the fact that it's cheap, and the fact that they can easier work on their own projects, even project when the market is the US from here, because it's cheaper and it gives them more time to do it.
So let's jump back to your expansion. So you were just in Colombia. You were making about $20,000 per month. You had 300,000 users looking for flights. What was the next step?
Yeah, so because of we went through the incubators program. These guys they kind of forced you into doing a series seed round. Why I'm telling that? Because usually they invest. So the terms in which the investment come is a convertible note. So basically it's some kind of a debt, but in order for that debt to convert into equity, you have to raise at least a certain amount of money. Okay. So I didn't like that at first because I didn't want to be forced into raising money if I don't need to. Okay. I think that we've been bootstrapping a lot for the first years and if you do a big round of financing, it comes with usually you have like some strings attached, so some inconvenience about doing it. But anyways, we were forced into it, so we decided to do it well, and we started to search for funds. So in Colombia, it was not very easy, I would say, because you don't have much options, and I think that's because the Colombian market as a whole is not big enough to sustain a lot of VC investments. Okay. So you have a few funds here. You have Accent Capital, which is from Spain, that has a fund in Colombia. You have Velum Ventures, which is a VC in Medellin. And these guys, they write tickets from, let's say, 300,000 to maybe a few $1 million. But that's not a lot of option in order for you to raise money. So at this point, what we decided to do, we said, okay, we don't want to be only the travel meta search of Colombia. We want to see bigger than that. We want to go to other countries. And we said, okay, so the next big market for us could be Mexico. And it happens that Mexico is also a much better place than Colombia to raise money. And that's kind of easy to understand because it's a much bigger market for almost anything. Okay. And the ecosystem was more mature. So basically, I got to Mexico. It was end of 2014. And I met with, let's say a dozen funds in 3 days. Okay. That's like 4 times what you have in the whole country of Colombia. Okay. So I was able to get a few more options in Mexico. And then as soon as I had enough options, I was ready to sign with a Spanish fund that operates here in Colombia. And because of an introduction that Andres did me with, with a hotel chain of Mexico, which is called City Express. Okay. The guys was very motivated to invest. So they brought us to Mexico. We had dinner and eventually we decided that we wanted to, because we got along well, we decided that we wanted to work with those guys and we wanted to have them invest in our companies, invest instead of the traditional funds. So basically what happened to us is that we ended up receiving money from an industrial players, from a hotel chain that was trying to innovate and that decided to, instead of building another hotel, they allocated the resource of building an hotel to a corporate fund and they did investment in travel and they did investment in Diageo.
No, that's interesting. That's pretty forward thinking for a Latin American traditional business. Why do you think that they were willing to do that?
I think because they're smart. Actually, they are if you look at their numbers, they are the third Mexican hotel chain in terms of size, but they are 15 years old. So compared to the other one that have like, let's say, 50 years on the market or more than that, they are doing pretty fast. They are very smart people and they saw that they needed to innovate and they had the opportunity to learn. So maybe they are not looking as much for returns as would a traditional fund do. But maybe they said, okay, maybe we can do return, but we can learn a lot in the process. Maybe we can find synergies with the company that we invest in. And maybe that's something that we should do. And I think as well that it was very advanced for them to do that in 2014. They started this fund, I think. Because if you look at like very large international chains such as Accor, for example, they did the same kind of things, but later than City Express did it.
And so you raised some money and then you basically had to open up the Mexican market, right?
Exactly. So with the money that we raised, the idea was to not only be the meta search of Colombia, but be the meta search of LATAM. So we started to open new markets. So we opened the Peruvian market. We opened Mexico. So we were operating in 4 markets. We started to gain tractions in those markets because we were trying to put the same focus into each market as we put into Colombia. Okay. By bringing content that was not searchable before. And I think that we started to be successful as doing that until the point that we opened Argentina and Brazil as well. And if you look at our numbers today, so Colombia is still growing very fast, but in terms of the percentage of revenues that it represents, it has shrunk to 40%. So we are making a sizable amount of money in all the other markets. And that's where the future is for us. That's where we have opportunity to grow a lot and gain traction.
Thinking about structure, I've talked to other Latin American operating businesses that when they open up a new country, they open up a subsidiary in each one of the countries, and then they do local deals and get local revenue in that country and then send it up to the headquarters. Or I've met with others that just have one company and they just invoice directly from that one company. Which way did you guys decide to go?
So basically the second way. So we have an operating company in Colombia, and that's all the kind of trade we are involved in are with the Colombian company. But sometimes it can become a problem, especially with Brazil, which is, I would say, by far the most complicated market that we have. It's very expensive for customers to send money to Colombia. Okay. So we know that it's not something that's sustainable. So we don't want to open a subsidiary in Brazil yet, but we know that at some point, And we are getting every day closer to that point. We will have to, because it's not sustainable for our customers to send money to Colombia.
And can you talk about why it's advantageous to a startup to have a structure where you have just one headquarters and not open up locally?
Yeah, I think the simpler your structure, the better. You want to, anytime you have a structure in a country, you need an accountant, you need lawyers, you need, it means a lot of overhead for your company, distractions. So I would go to the simplest structure possible. So in our case, it's a bit more complicated than that, because we also have a holding company in the US, but the role of a holding company was just to receive the money from the investment, so from the Mexican investors, and then the shareholders are basically sharing the company at the holding level in the US, and then the holding is 100% owner of the subsidiary in Colombia, which is the operating company that employ people, pay your employees, receive money from our customers, and pay our providers.
Yeah, we do the same with most of the companies we invest in as well, where they'll invest in the US, and then if they operate worldwide, you might have the US company receiving and making payments and having some employees. But then for the Latin American team, or if there's any Latin American business, that's all going through, in our case, generally a Chilean company.
And also what you have to look at is the kind of double taxation agreement between countries. So usually most countries in Latin America have double taxation agreements with one another. But for example, it's not the case of Brazil with Colombia. So that's something you need to look at, because if without the double taxation agreement, the cost of taxes can be very high. So that, for instance, that's why in our case, we decided to do an LLC company in the US, which is a transparent entity, and that's not involved into any trade business, so that it's not a taxable company in the US. Otherwise, we would have to pay income tax in the US and then in Colombia. So that would be terrible for us.
What were some of the steps that you took to expand into countries like Argentina and Brazil as you were starting to grow?
I think that our success case, it's a success case that we are still building, is the one of Brazil, because Brazil it's a tough country, it's a tough market, it's very large, it's a different language, the culture is different, as in any countries of Latin America, I would say. It was a bit more crowded than other markets in terms of competition for us. So what we did is that, operation for Viajala is kind of simple, because our customers are travel brands, so you don't have like 1,000 travel brands that you need to list into your search engine. Maybe you have like a few dozens. Okay, so you need someone to do the B2B, to do the business developments, and to maintain the relationship with these travel brands. And usually you want somebody very senior, very good to do that, and someone that you can trust. So it's kind of expensive. Okay, so that's an investment that you need to take. And then we have somebody that focus on the B2C aspect, so basically bringing consumers to our website, okay, to search for travel through Viajala. And this person is in Brazil as well. So we have an operation of 2 people in Brazil, and it's been very efficient for us. So Brazil, we launched this country 9 months ago, and it's already something like 20% of our business, and it's growing extremely fast for us.
What city did you decide to operate out of?
So that's kind of funny, because in Colombia, we decided to put our headquarters in Medellin, which is the second largest city, and not in Bogota. And the reason for that is, I think, number one, quality of life, and number two, maybe cost. Okay. But in Brazil, we had to operate from São Paulo. It's not my favorite city in Brazil. I would say that, I prefer Rio a lot, for example, if you ask me. But still, it's the best city to do business. So I would say that most of the travel brands, most of our customers, they are based in São Paulo. So that made much more sense for us to have operation in São Paulo. Also, in terms of the kind of talent that we get, to say the truth, and we were pretty open, and we opened the position both in Rio and São Paulo, but it happened that we found better people in São Paulo from our experience.
And were you always entrepreneurial back before you started this company, or did you work in bigger companies before this?
I told you, I'm still quite young. I'm 31, so it's basically my second work experience. I worked for 3 years. I would say that I worked for 3 years in a startup company, but it was an already large startup, so about 300 people working for them already. Let's say I entered there and we were 200, and when they sold the company to Rakuten, it was 300 people. So it was, kind of in between. And I would not say that it was an entrepreneurial experience for me, but still it was a good motivation, to see the founder succeed and be able to build a company, in 10 years from nothing to, 250. It was $250 million, the exit that they got. So it's kind of the inspiration that I got. And I think that before that, my entire life, I like to do, side business, or let's say make a bit of money through, eBay and that kind of stuff. I'm somebody kind of independent, I would say. So I appreciate my startup life a lot more than my previous experience.
So talking about independence, what was the reaction of your friends and family back in Europe when you said, you know what, we're moving to Chile to try to start a Latin American business?
Yeah, so my my parents really freaked out. So, people in France are not entrepreneurial at all. So in France, what you have is like big groups. So we have the CAC 40, which is like the Dow Jones, always the same company. I think since I'm born, it's the same company there. Okay. Like, gas company and luxury companies and, always the same. So you don't see a lot of new companies getting into the top 40 in France, at least. And people usually, what they like to do is, get into big groups and then go to the top. Okay. And they are very faithful to the same company. So if you look at my father, for example, he worked for the same company for his entire life. And it used to be a small company, 20 people, that was acquired by a bigger one and then by a bigger one. And now he works for a very large group and he's been working for the same company for his entire life. So it was, according to him, a very bad decision to quit the company I used to work for and start my own business, because that's not something that people usually do. And talking to most people, it also seemed like a very bad idea, because none of the people I knew were entrepreneurs. So it's very difficult, I think, for people that look into a stable, lifestyle. It's very, very difficult for them to think that it's a good choice to start a business, actually. And I think that most of them thought I would fail.
Yep, that's generally how it is. Even if you start something in the US, probably most people are thinking you're not going to do so well. So what would you say to people that are in the US or Europe about why they should be looking at Latin America as a place to potentially do business?
I think that I think you have a big advantage when you come from the US or Europe, because we have access to a lot of commodities. We also are into markets where the competition is very tough. So prices are usually much lower than what you see in Latin America for many different stuff. So when you come to Latin America, you start to see that you have an opportunity to sell books online, for example. You don't have that in Colombia, for example. It's very, very tough to do that. Let's say to do, I don't know, a carpooling marketplace or whatever, because those kind of services just don't exist here. So you have a lot of opportunities, I think, to bring successful models that makes our life easier into Latin America, where people don't have access to these things.
What would be one of the most surprising things that somebody in US or Europe wouldn't know about doing business in either Colombia or just Latin America in general?
Yeah. So it's always difficult for me to answer these questions, because I've never started a business anywhere else. So I don't really have a point of comparison, but I would say that I don't know, because I don't have a comparison point. But let's say you have things that can be very frustrating. For example, countries here are very bureaucratic, okay, compared to Europe, which is already bureaucratic. And the reason for that is because of the kind of level of corruption that you have here, okay? But still, I think that there is always a way to figure out things. So, for example, it's cheap to hire somebody that will solve this problem for you. If you don't know about bureaucratic stuff, it will be very easy for you to find somebody that can help you out with that. It's easy to be competitive, to hire people, pay them well compared to other companies, and bring people to help you out. And I think that when I started, I was very frustrated by the administration, by the bureaucracy, by many things. And I was able to figure that by, bringing good people to my companies, simply because we are doing kind of well compared to other companies here, and we are able to give people better opportunities compared to what they already have.
So along that same sort of line of surprising things that people from abroad don't really know, what's something that maybe it's not surprising, but that they don't understand about Latin America or doing business in Latin America?
I think that maybe something that they don't understand here is that the problems that people face can be very different. Let's say if you look at Colombia, 50% of the population, 50% of the workforce work in an informal way. So they don't have like proper employment contract and stuff. So, you don't want to sell Mercedes to these guys or Audi or luxury cars. It's very different kind of market. But I was talking to a company recently that is importing cheap motorcycle from India and distributing them into Colombia. And they are very successful simply because, they are actually resolving the real issues of the Colombian people, that can buy cheap motors and get around Medellin or get around Bogota in the way they want.
And so now that you've expanded across Latin America, you've raised some money locally, what's the company look like today?
Yeah, so we started 4, then we were 5 when we went through the incubators. Last year, 10 people. Now we are 16 people. 10 are working from Medellin, from headquarters. Then we have people working remotely. So it's been, part of our culture since the beginning, because sometimes when you look for a very specific kind of skill set, you need to hire somebody that maybe live in Italy or in England or whatever. So we have 6 remote workers, a couple in São Paulo. We have one in Buenos Aires. We have a couple of people in Europe, someone in Bogota. Okay. We are expanding into new markets. We are doing this kind of fast. And I think that, now we are in the situation that we can either, look into more funding to go faster, or go back to this bootstrap mindset that we started with and start to make our own cash, and make the company self-sufficient.
What are some of the challenges of working with a distributed team, and what are some of the strategies you use to make the company run well?
I would say that the main challenge is that I don't like it. I prefer to be around people. I don't know if you read this book, Rework,
Yep.
by the founder of Basecamp. They give a lot of arguments about good aspects of having distributed team and people working remotely for your company. But from my opinion, I still think that things happen in the office, and sometimes you have an idea at a very precise moment and you want to share this idea with your coworkers, and maybe this idea grow into something. And I think that this does not happen with a distributed team. So that's the disadvantage that I see. The big advantage is that you can find better people in some cases, but still, we learn to work that way, I think, and now you have to work that way much easier. So you have tools like Slack, for example, to chat the entire day, Skype, Hangout, whatever. Now that we are making more money, we also bring people very frequently to our headquarters. So we start to gather everybody every 3 months, basically, but that costs a lot of money when you have a lot of remote workers. But that's something that I strongly recommend, because you have to keep a link between your coworkers. But I would say, the main challenge is to keep everybody motivated, because sometimes, when you're working from home and very far away, it can become tough to wake up in the morning and be motivated, but what you do.
So you talked a little bit about potentially thinking about raising some money going forward. What advice would you give to U.S. investors about why they should be looking at companies like yours that are operating in Latin America?
I'd say that they should do that because of the lack of competition that you have here in terms of funds. So I think it's kind of easy for a fund to be competitive in Latin America, especially in markets like Colombia and Chile, I would say, because you don't have like so much competition. I should not say that, because that might, bring competition to your funds. But still, I think that a country like Colombia, you can build a good fund here, and there is still very good companies that cannot raise money or have to raise money in terms that are not standard because of the lack of competition.
Now, I would be happy to have more funds operating that are like us, or First Rock, or Corral in Costa Rica, and some of the other funds that are operating in Brazil. I would be happy to have more doing it in the ecosystem, because it's just going to make everybody better. And there's, we can only invest in 10 or 11 companies per year. And there's way more than that, even just in Chile, that should be getting funding. So
you start to see investments coming from the US directly into companies in Latin America. So here in Colombia, for instance, we have a company called Rappi. Okay. It's basically a mobile app from which you can buy your groceries. Okay. And they ship your groceries at your home. And they raised a lot of money from Andreessen Horowitz. Then they have a competitor that I think is in Mexico and Chile, which is Corner Shop, that raised money from Axel. So I think that funds from the US are seeing investments maybe in this kind of models. Usually it's this kind of models that like a lot to US funds.
Yep, that's right. Right now, it's sort of the first step where you're seeing a change where you've got the sort of top tier US funds starting to make investments in companies operating in Latin America. You're right. It's been in sort of these models that everyone already sort of understands. There's Instacart in the US. So, okay, Corner Shop and Rappi, we understand that. Things like online real estate portals, people understand that. So there's been money coming into Brazil and into other parts of Latin America. So I think that's probably phase one. And phase two will end up being more traditional venture capital.
Exactly.
So going back to when you were just getting your start in Startup Chile, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give yourself if you could go back and talk to you then?
Yeah, I think I would do everything much quicker, but you need to. I was a first-time founder, so that's normal that I had to figure things out by myself. But I would say that some things that I did better than most people in Startup Chile, so that would be more of an advice for Startup Chile founders, is to be very focused into launching our product as fast as we could, because the program only gives you 6 months to prove something. After that, if you haven't proven anything, basically it's go home and start again and look for a job. So I think that's something we did well. We focused on launching a product very fast and start. I was reading an article that you posted in entrepreneurial.com, I think, about, LATAM entrepreneur. It's not as easy to raise funds. So you need to focus on making money from the very start, an advice that you were giving to US entrepreneurs. And I think that's very true. So from the very beginning, we focus on building a product and having travel brands paying to list their offer in our product and make money, because that's the first way we were able to survive until we raise money from the incubators.
Yeah, I mean, that advice is so basic for starting a business, or was so basic for starting a business for basically all of humanity up until the last, call it like 10 years in the United States, where we've had this sort of hyper growth at all costs mentality that I don't know if you've heard of indie VC in the US, but they talk about how it's just gotten out of whack. Their whole thing is investing in real businesses that are actually making money, which is, again, like unheard of for a lot of these tech startups. And I think that from Latin America, that's just been, you've had to do that because there isn't that huge amount of venture capital that can sort of pay for hyper growth or paper over a lot of mistakes or different business models that may not have worked. So I think that's really important that Latin Americans are able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's a big shame, because if you look at a program like Startup Chile, it's such a good opportunity it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity to become a successful entrepreneur, become independent, make a successful business, and don't have to search for a job ever again. But you look at most people that comes to this program, and basically they don't even ship a product until the very end of the program, and that's already way too late. So basically they just lose their times, and it's public money. Chile is doing pretty well, but still, people don't reach there. So I think it's a shame to waste public money for Chile, not focusing on launching soon enough and failing just because you were not focused enough.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think fortunately, it seems like it's gotten better over the last few years. They made some changes in the program and sort of push people to launch earlier, which I think is right. And if you look at Parallel 18, which sort of took all the lessons that Sebastian learned as the director of Startup Chile, they put such a strong focus on making sure that you get a product out. So, but I agree with you. It's really important to going as fast as possible and not just sort of, oh, we've got some free money, let's just hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, the sad story is some people, they just use that money and they are very excited about, the startup things, and maybe they do a lot of networking the first month. They start to work on their product the second one, and then they find out that it's too hard and they just travel around Chile and waste everybody's time and money, I think.
Yeah, the good thing is that there are some of those guys. Hope there's not that many anymore, which is good. Ever since the Facebook movie, entrepreneurship got cool.
Yeah.
And So there's a lot of people in it who are trying to be rock stars or superheroes,
exactly.
or all that sort of BS that I really, really don't like. I mean, entrepreneurship is supposed to be hard. It is hard. The reality of it is like, I talk about it where it's like you're in the kitchen trying to cook something, but you actually don't have the pan yet. And you just actually are like sticking your hand on the burner all the time. That's like what it really is. And it's not being a superhero or a rock star. You just do it because that's what you need to do.
Exactly. I agree with you.
So what advice would you give to people who are thinking about getting into a startup? We sort of talked about it a little bit, but what would you tell someone who's saying, yeah, you know what, maybe I want to start something?
Yeah. So I would say first, I think it's good to, I was giving these, bus trip example. I think it's important that you feel the problems because if you feel the problem, you know that you're solving a real issue. So I think that's the first step. Second step is that you need to have some of the skills that are required to solve that problem. So in my case, I have 3 years experience in product development of digital product. Okay. Then what you can do, it's important to find co-founders that can do it. So I could not scale properly or fast enough. So I hired someone to do the co-founders to do the B2B, the business development for me. I'm a software engineer, but still I'm not the best developer. So I had my CTO, who's a very good developer. So that's kind of stuff. It's very important to find new co-founders. And then I'm coming back to what I said earlier, but you have to ship the product as soon as you can. And I'm going to quote, Reid Hoffman, who says, is the co-founder of LinkedIn. He says, if you're proud of your product when you launch, it's because you launched too late. And I think it's true. And if you would see the first version of Diajala, it was very ugly, I think. And it was not the best user experience, but still it enabled us to make sure that we were solving something, and we could bring consumers to our websites, and the travel brands would be paying in order to list their offers. And we did not have to ship a perfect product to do that. So we were able to ship a product within 3 months and then iterate from that product. So that's the main advice that I would give. And then I would say people not to expect money to, come down from the skies. And I think it's even something good when you don't have money, because when you don't have money is where you become leaner and much more focused into making some. And you start to feel urgency, and that's when you become successful.
What's the coolest thing about your business today? Is it the amount of customers that you have, the coverage that you have, or something else entirely?
I think the coolest thing is that companies like Kayak, when they saw that we were doing well, they came to compete with us. And the fun thing is that they don't have 10% of the traction that we have in Colombia, for instance, or Chile. So that was, the main concern of many people I was pitching Diajala to, that, Kayak could come in, put a lot of money into this market and would beat us, but nothing like that happened.
Do you have any books, podcasts, or talks or anything that you've watched or read that you like, that you think that would be beneficial to other entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I like to read business books. So ones that the last time I read is many common. I think many people read it, is Steve Jobs' biography. Okay. And I didn't like Steve Jobs a lot before reading it, but still I think it's very useful to see all the creative process that he puts into building products and make products that people want, but without asking people, without doing market research, with an approach about, simple, doing things very simple, start from something that might be too complex and remove any kind of, complexity from it. And I think that people like this kind of products. So if you look at Apple computers or iPhone, they're very simple. If you look at the Google search, it's very simple as well. And I think, the idea is that, less is more, pretty much is very important. And I think it's what gives us a chance as a startup to beat very big companies. It's the fact that actually the simplest things are the best. So you don't have to do something very complex. You don't have to add a lot of features to your product for it to be the best. You need to do something simple. That's one example of one that I like. Another one that I like that I read recently, I don't know if you've read it. It's called Let My People Go Surfing, and it was written by the founder of Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard.
I haven't.
Okay, you haven't. So I think it's very good book to read because he has a very different approach about business. Actually, he's not a businessman at first. He's someone that likes doing climbing stuff and, adventurous sports and stuff like that. And he started building gears for himself and for his friends simply because you could not find these kind of gears at the beginning. So he started selling gears for climbing, and then he started getting into the clothes business, and he founded this brand called Patagonia, but without really being a businessman. So basically focusing on doing as little impact as possible on the environment when selling his products, by offering good quality of life to his employees. So basically an example is to let them go surfing, but also he was one of the first in the US to put a childcare center into his offices because, the guys that used to work there were families and friends and they had kids, and it was the easiest way for them to be happy and to be able to work and be with their kids at the same time. So I think it's a very good book because it gives you a very different approach. And what I like about both of these books is because these guys, they are not focusing on building companies to sell them or to do an IPO and go away with the money and move on. They are building company to last. So it's a common thing that they have. So Steve Jobs and Yvon Chouinard. So Steve Jobs, he always say that he wants Apple to be there after his death, and he wants this company to be there for 100 years. And that's exactly the exact same thing that Yvon Chouinard says about Patagonia, that he wants to build a company that will be there in 100 years. And at some points, they were focusing on very high growth. And then they decided to change their approach and not focus on very high growth and short term, but rather focus on building a company that could be there in 100 years. So I would not say that's what we are doing at Viajala, but still I think it's good to read about it. And it's good to see that usually when you don't focus on profit, but you focus on building good products and solving real issues, profit come along anyway.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Well, I hope you have a lot of success going forward, continue to expand across Latin America. I actually recommended your service to a friend of mine from Australia who's coming to Latin America and couldn't find any of the low-cost airlines for Colombia when she was searching on the normal meta searches. So you're definitely providing value, and I hope you continue to keep growing.
Thank you a lot, Nathan.
Thanks for being on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Thomas Allier. If you're traveling in South America, check out his company viajala.com and find the best flight deals for all the flights across Latin America. And if you enjoy this podcast, as always, please subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher, and please give me a rating on iTunes. It'd be very helpful and much appreciated. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your day.